Something's happening here on my device, but I think I'm all right. Because, as I always say, I never know what I'm going to talk about when we come together. And seeing as how it's 4th of July, I thought, well, something about liberation. But, Joan knows well, we've been going through Joseph Goldstein's book. And because of the things that I was thinking about on the retreat, I just thought I would go back to the idea of perception. And I can't read from my Kindle, which I so like to do, because it keeps crashing on my computer. I've given up. I think I might have to actually go talk to somebody if they ever answer a phone, rather than go troubleshoot online. But I'm going to read a little bit out of, we're on the material elements of and feelings and perceptions. So it's the third of the 5 aggregates. We kind of covered the aggregates earlier, but they always come around, which actually was really on my mind in retreat there at Cloud Mountain was, the sense of self that we create, and how as we keep looking into the true nature of things arising and passing away, we begin understanding the perception that we are made up of the 5 aggregates, these different combinations of material elements and feelings, and perception is the third one of the 5 aggregates. So I'm going to read a little bit out of Joseph's book. Perceptions, like feeling, is singled out from all the other mental factors as one of the aggregates because of its prominent role in the process both of our conditioning and of our liberation. I got to liberation, yay! I'm trying to find liberation, seeing as how it's 4th of July. As mentioned earlier, perception is the factor that picks out the distinguishing marks of an object, names it, then remembers this word or concept and applies it to the next time we experience that particular object. So perception is how we condition things. It's perception arises and it picks out whatever our object is, and then it names it, and then it remembers that particular object, and then next time around it sort of repeats the same thing. So for example, we hear a sound, and the sound waves in the ear are physical phenomenon. It's being pleasant or unpleasant is the feeling tone, and it is a perception that recognizes that particular sound, names it as a bird or the air conditioning or the dog, and then applies the same name to the next time that kind of sound is heard again. When perception and mindfulness are balanced, they work together in the service of insight. But when they are out of balance, perception can keep us imprisoned in the world of concepts, imprisoned in the conventional idea of self. The particular perceptions we have, the concepts we use to describe things, often condition the way we feel about different experiences. Unfortunately, in many situations, our perceptions are inaccurate. Joseph says that on one retreat, a meditator told him the story of his building a new home in the country. And as he was watching the building go up over a period of months, he began to notice 2 great blue herons flying around the area. They're majestic birds, and he was delighted to see them. Then a short time after the house was finished and he had moved in, he began to hear a chirping sound from the basement, thinking that the blue heron had made a nest while the house was being built and had just had chicks. He was delighted every time he heard the sound. Sometime later, when repairs were being made in the basement, the workman came up and commented that there was a faulty smoke detector making a kind of chirping sound. As soon as the sound went from being a delightful blue heron to an annoying smoke detector, it had to be fixed immediately. So it wasn't a nice chirping bird anymore. So, I mean, perception. Nothing had changed but the concept. And yet the attitude of the mind was very different. And so we make these different perceptions. We have a perception of solidity. So when we don't really observe the 5 aggregates carefully, there's a deeply habituated perception that we have about the world and ourselves that becomes the origin of many inaccurate conclusions. It's a perception that keeps us from understanding what is true. This is the perception we have of the solidity of things. We believe in the solidity of material phenomenon, in the solidity or stability of relationships, of societies. But as long as this perception of solidity and stability is fixed, we don't deeply understand the impermanent and insubstantial nature of all phenomenon, which is still what we're doing over and over again by simply watching our breath and seeing that it arises and passes, that it's not stable, it's not solid. Why is this perception of solidity so strong, he asks? Why is it so strongly conditioned in our view of reality? One reason is the rapidity of the changes taking place. Things are moving so quickly, we don't see the discontinuities. For example, when we go to a movie, we don't see separate frames of film. They're moving quickly enough across the screen that all the images flow seamlessly into one another. Or when we see an electric light, we see the light as continuous rather than a flow of electrons through a filament. Or nowadays it's LEDs, so there's no filaments there. I'm not sure what we're looking at. I'll have to ask Bill, the LED master. Another reason we don't see the insubstantial nature of phenomenon is because we're usually observing things from a distance and so not seeing their composite nature. If we look at a hillside from a distance, all we will see is a mass of color. As we come closer, we begin to see individual trees, then parts of trees. And then, on a cellular or a molecular level, no trees at all. On this level, the perception of solidity, even of a tree, has disappeared. This is the same with all objects of experience. They seem solid only from one limited perspective. Oh, I look up and I lose my place. For this reason, the view of solidity is called a hallucination of perception. Kalu Rinpoche, one of the great Tibetan masters of the last century, certainly expressed this understanding. You live in confusion and the illusion of things. There is a reality. You are the reality. When you know that, you will know that you are nothing, and in being nothing, are everything. That is all. I think I'll read that one again. That was like a tongue twister. You live in confusion and the illusion of things. There is a reality. You are that reality. When you know that, you will know that you are nothing, and in being nothing, are everything. That is all. And so there's also the concepts. There's the perception of concepts, that when there's perception without mindfulness, which is our usual way of being in the world, we recognize the surface appearances of things. We haven't entered deeply into the experience, and we don't see that it's impermanent or insubstantial when we're not really, when there's perception, but we don't have mindfulness happening. And so we can see this tendency to solidify our view of the world through superficial perceptions and concepts in many areas of life, sometimes very harmful consequences. And we also have place and ownership, that we create concepts of place and then take them to be real. How many wars have been fought and people killed over boundaries that aren't real? And when astronauts viewed our planet from space, many commented on the beauty of seeing it whole and undivided. Remember that beautiful picture of the Earth from space? I mean, we see it all over the place now, but we create these concepts of ownership and possessiveness with the idea that we can fundamentally own things. And sometimes this is on a global scale, as in the eras of colonialism, when one country claimed ownership of another. Sometimes it's on a local scale, as we claim our own personal space. I mean, even when you're on retreat, a person doesn't like it very much if somebody walks into the meditation hall and then finds somebody else sitting in their place. All kinds of, feathers get ruffled. And there would be a few moments of disturbance. So the Buddha taught that we cannot be said to truly own even our minds and bodies, much less anything else. And then there's the concept of time, perception of time. A powerful concept that often rules our lives is the concept of time, of past and future. But when we look carefully at how we experience what we call time, what do we find? Perception recognizes certain kinds of thoughts, memories, recollections, plans, creates the concept of past and future, and then takes these concepts to have some intrinsic reality. But what's actually happening is simply different thoughts are arising and passing in the moment, which is really, really fascinating to look at. That we create these concepts of past and present and future, and all that's really happening is thoughts are arising in the mind and passing away in the moment. When we begin to see that our experience of past and future is just a thought in the moment, a huge burden is lifted. We have a little more freedom in our lives. It doesn't mean that we don't use these thoughts skillfully, but rather that we're not lost in our mind-created worlds. And on an even subtler level, we can also see that the notion of present itself is a concept, one that we can become attached to. There's a Portuguese-French poet, Fernando Pessoa, and he expressed it well when he said, "Live, you say, in the present. Live only in the present. But I don't want the present. I want reality. I only want reality. Things without time present." And the Buddha connected this insight with the very process of awakening, when he taught, let go of the past, let go of the future, let go of the present, and cross over to the furthest shore of existence. With the mind wholly liberated, you shall come to no more birth or death. And we create also in our perceptions, we create a sense of self. Besides the constructs of place and time, we live in this mind-created world of self-image and roles and the idea of ourselves that we present to others, that we that we believe of ourselves. And as soon as we identify with any role or image, it's already a limitation. I think it's interesting to notice sometimes. As you can see, I haven't been talking for a week. I've just been whispering and writing notes. I'm not used to using my vocal cords right now. Joseph tells this story. Joan, you might remember this. It's a really cute one. He tells this story in the book. I'm going to see if I can find it here. When we're not caught up in concepts of self-image, the mind is more open and relaxed and more spontaneous in the moment. So here's something from Christine Cox, a writer and an editor, and she wrote this wonderful moment with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. My friend Sid once placed a Groucho Marx mask in a hotel room where the Dalai Lama would be staying during a visit to an Ivy League university. It was a gesture of karmic abandon, because really, who could gauge the terrestrial and spiritual consequences of such an act? Good point. So imagine this, a cascade of university bureaucrats arrayed in the Dalai Lama's suite, waiting for their guest to appear. They sit erect in armchairs designed for slouching. Minutes pass, and then a door flings open. Unaccountably, Groucho Marx, wearing long maroon robes and serious lace-up shoes, emerges, chuckling loudly, laughing so hard that tears come to his bespectacled eyes. How do people react when a dignitary, especially of the spiritual kind, does something so, well, undignified? Intrigued, I call up the university official in charge of the visits of the accomplished and the famous and the presidential. She clearly is not a woman easily impressed. How did she feel, I asked, at the Groucho Marx moment? At first, she tells me she didn't know how to react, and then she said, and everyone started to laugh at the wonderful absurdity of the situation. Laughed with a joy and incaution uncharacteristic of people in their positions. Laura, that's what you should do the next time you go to a big meeting. Wear some really crazy, just wear Groucho Marx glasses and a mustache. The Dalai Lama didn't care about maintaining his image. He saw a chance for fun, for deflating others' expectations, and he took it. And he just somehow knew whom to thank. Wagging his finger at Sid, he took off the mask, still laughing. Even His Holiness needs a little Groucho in his life. So we create concepts about things that may seem even more fundamental, like age and gender and race and culture. How old is your breath? Now there's a good question. Is the pain in your knee male or female? What color is your mind? It's not to say that these concepts don't point to certain differences of experiences. They do. But we often become so identified with and attached to the concept that we solidify and we fix the sense of who we are. The Nobel Prize-winning poet Wisława Szymborska illuminates the limitation of this convention of perception in her poem called View with a Grain of Sand. We call it a grain of sand, but it calls itself neither grain nor sand. It does just fine without a name, whether general, particular, permanent, passing, incorrect, or apt. Our glance, our touch means nothing to it. It doesn't feel itself seen and touched, and that it fell on the windowsill. Its only experience. Nope, that's wrong. Let me get that sentence right. And that it fell on the windowsill is its only experience. For it It is not different from falling on anything else, for no assurance that it has finished falling or that it is falling still. The window has a wonderful view of a lake, but the view doesn't view itself. It exists in this world, colorless, shapeless, soundless, odorless, and painless. The lake's floor exists floorlessly, and its shore exists shorelessly. The water feels itself neither wet nor dry, and its waves to themselves are neither singular nor plural. They splash deaf to their own noise on pebbles neither large nor small. And all this beneath a sky of nature skyless, in which the sun sets without setting at all, and hides without hiding behind an unminding cloud. The wind ruffles it, the only reason being that it blows. A second passes, a second, a third. But they're 3 seconds only for us. Time has passed like a courier with urgent news, but that's just our simile. The character is invented, his haste is make-believe, his news inhuman. That's quite an interesting poem, quite an interesting reflection. One of our deepest conditionings and the source of so much suffering in our lives comes from one basic misguided perception, which is the mind-created concepts of self. This is the idea that there is someone behind experiences to whom this is all happening. We recognize a pattern of physical and mental elements. We call it myself, we call it candle, we're called candle all my life. And then fail to look past the perceived pattern, not seeing that these concepts are only a designation for an arising appearance of complex interactions, the 5 aggregates coming together. Imagine for a moment a great summer storm. There is wind and rain, thunder and lightning, but there is no storm apart from these elements. Storm is simply the concept or designation for this interrelated mix of phenomenon. In the same way, when we look more closely at what we're calling self, we see a constellation of rapidly changing elements, each one of which is itself momentary and insubstantial. Understanding our experience through the lens of the 5 aggregates helps us realize for ourselves the fundamental selfless nature of all phenomenon. And we see this over and over again in our practice by just sitting and watching each thing arise and pass away and realizing that we perceive it as something, we call it something, but it is impermanent and selfless, and consequently if we try to see this clearly and understand it moment to moment, we can be relaxed and have a sense of total freedom, total liberation, moment to moment. Let's take a few moments and let those words settle down. I'll ring the bell. We'll sit for a couple of minutes. Let those words settle down and see what rises under conditions. May we find some kernels from this idea of perception and letting go of some of our perceptions of things to see things newly and freshly, to help us free ourselves from our clinging and attachment that causes us suffering. And we have spent some noble time here together. May the merit of our practice flow to those around us, to those that support us, because it is a great thing to spend your time attending to the Dharma. And before we talk a little more and go to closure, I'm going to find the sharing of the merit. So that we can have the joy of sharing what we're doing here with ourselves and with each other. The efforts that we put toward our freedom and toward seeing things clearly is a skillful, noble activity. So let's see if I can find the right thing on the screen here. Here it is. Does it show up clearly? No, it shows up blue. There we go. Let me try to get all my notes out of the way. And you can sing along, going down on the downward arrows and up on the upward arrows. But keep your mic. I guess I'll have to scroll. So here we go. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease and all harmful states of mind until I realize Nibbana. In every kind of birth, may I have an upright mind with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord. I like to use the word guide. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. Thank you for listening to the Dharma. And thank you for taking this time. It's a very precious time. And I know things are challenging for all of us in so many different ways. So unmute yourselves, wave goodbye. You see over here in the side, I put the link for portlandinsight.org for other classes that are going on. There's lots of them all the time. And there's a link at the bottom for if you want to give dana for tonight. It's not necessary. It's always an option, and however you Give to yourself the gift of the Dharma. That's the most important thing.